What's up, everybody? This is our Horror Psych episode number 2. I'm here. My name is Dave. I am here with my co-host, Brandon. I'm stuttering over my own words because I'm a little nervous about this episode, Brandon. I was just kind of saying that ahead of time. I feel like with these Horror Psych episodes, we got to know what we're talking about. And
Yeah, I definitely feel you. And that's just putting together like all this information and kind of just going through it because you have to just look at films from a different angle. So I definitely understand where you're coming from.
I was presented this one to you a while back. And then as I'm doing it, I'm like, I wonder if this is too obvious and everyone's already had this thought about this film, but I never hear anyone talk about it directly. So the film that we chose to do this episode about is a 1988 Frank Henenlotter film, Brain Damage.
Yep.
One of our favorites.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Over the pandemic, I probably watched this film 50 times.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And just growing up, just watching this film, I remember watching it for the first time. Probably, I think I watched it on one of the Joe Bob's television with my grandmother when it a long time ago. So I'm a big fan of Frank Henenlotter. So just let's get right into this.
Yeah. So, Brandon, you mentioned you'd seen it a long time ago. I think my first time seeing it was actually when Joe Bob had it on Shudder.
Oh, okay.
So whenever he played it that first time, I think that was my first time.
Mm.
And then we watched it again live with Joe Bob at the Coolidge Theater.
Yep.
And we've also played it for our crowd over at Buttonwoods Brewery. Shout out to Buttonwoods Brewery in Cranston.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we definitely have connected with this film. But the angle that we're going to go with today is looking at this film as a representation of substance abuse, and addiction.
Yep.
So just kind of summarizing the setup of the film, it takes place in New York City with our protagonist, Brian, played by Rick Hurst. He's got his girlfriend, Barbara. Brian also lives with his brother, Mike. And then also in this building is this elderly couple who we see in the start of the film, Morris and Martha.
Yep. And so we'll talk about those two after we kind of give the rundown of the film. So for anyone that hasn't seen this film yet, Brain Damage is the second feature film of director Frank Henenlotter. Following the release of Basket Case, the film took place in Manhattan, New York City in 1987. Like Dave said earlier, the film actually released in 1988. And I remember we had Doug on the episode, and we kind of talked about the whole scene of New York back in that time and how cool it was, and so it definitely stands out to a lot of films. So, that's definitely what stuck out to me, all the neon colors, the signs of everything, and just craziness.
Yep.
But the film is categorized as containing themes relating to both drug abuse and sexuality. Brain Damage was reportedly inspired by Frank Henenlotter's own cocaine addiction, which is something. It was a lot of people spectated that, it had a little bit more to it, but I think Frank came out and kind of let everybody know, no, this is what it's about. Mm-hmm. He likened the film to be a superficial adaptation of Faust. So that was something that when I doing research and everything, I kind of found out, and I was like, oh, that's definitely a different take on things, and you see it from different views. And like I said earlier, Henenlotter rejected the notion that Brain Damage could be reasonably viewed as pro-drug in nature, stating, "If I plan to portray drugs as pleasurable, Brian wouldn't have lost everything that had meaning to him. Like Barbara, we're gonna get into later on, which is his girlfriend, his life, all of it. He's left alone with his pleasure. Then what's the point? So I think that, like we said earlier, when you make a film or you do anything and then someone wants to review it and then kind of take their own views and kind of force it down and then try to make the film seem a different way, how can you really sit there and do that from an angle, from something that somebody went through and created? You know what I mean? Have you noticed that in a lot of films or just things? And
and I do like trying to attach meaning to anything. So
Yeah.
When I watch a film, I like to try to look at it through different angles and perspectives. However, if the film, if the film's creator comes out and gives like this, general idea, then like I can't sit here and be like, no, it's not about that. But
Yeah.
also, like, that's what art's all about, is we all make our own connections and interpretations of it. So I think it's just important for people to understand that, like, the what you take out of a film is an interpretation. The same as like when us sitting back and watching Smile, all that seemed to, the way we laid that out, and it all seemed to make sense in the scheme of what we were talking about. But like,
Yeah.
if the filmmaker came on and was like, "No, nah, it has nothing to do with any of that," I'm not going to sit here and be like, "Yes, it does." So
Yeah.
the same with this, I would never have a guessed, though, watching this film, I never would have guessed it was about cocaine use.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's like that, and that's one thing that he just goes on and says, this is more of just the monster movie. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
so it can be taken any way, because like I said, for me, viewing it for the first time when I was young, I viewed it as a monster movie. I didn't know it had anything to do with drugs or anything
Sure.
until later on down the road. So it's kind of cool. It's like when you're able to sit there and watch movies and then go back and watch it in like in a whole different light and a different view, and how much it changes. So it's like it's kind of cool seeing things like that. And when the film first starts off, I mean, like we talked about the neighbors, it it shows them like on the ground, kind of sitting there going through withdrawals because Elmer is missing. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you want to talk about that state of
sure.
like drug.
Yeah. And I mean, just for everyone to give context, if you haven't seen Brain Damage, which we definitely encourage you to watch it before you even listen to this, not
Yep.
that I think you necessarily need to beforehand, it just helps give context. Elmer is like this blue worm like creature that, I don't know, he's probably like a foot long, and he attaches to the back of your neck and digs his teeth and then some weird looking tubes into your
Yeah.
neck that connect to your brain, and they release some kind of blue liquid that makes you trip out.
Yep.
Yeah, so when we open up, we see them sitting in, he's Morris is sitting in the living room, and Martha comes in and she has some brains for him.
Yep.
And, I forget what kind of brain was it. It was like an animal brain, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
So she's like, I got his brains, and then they go to look for him because he stays in water and he's supposed to be in the bathtub and he's missing. So they start to freak out, and it's that panic, right? It's
Yep.
that panic that like, oh no, how are we going to get our fix? And that they just start scrounging, and there's just like desperation.
Hmm.
That's kind of like what I feel that bottom of the barrel is.
Yeah.
It's that, for those people who have done drugs, they probably would understand that, like, you're scraping everything trying to get the last of, like, everyone kind of knows what we're talking about here. But
Yeah.
like, it's that real desperate, I need a little bit more,
Hmm.
and it's nowhere to be found. So I mean, even though it's represented by these, like, this old couple,
Hmm.
to me this kind of represents like just those addicts that would be in your building or whatever, if you're living in the city or in your neighborhood or something like that. That's kind of like what Morris and Martha represent. They bring it to the building, right? They brought Elmer to the building, so they're the reason Brian ends up getting associated with Elmer, because Elmer
Yep.
escapes the building and suddenly he's in Brian's room, which we never see how he gets into his room.
Yeah.
It's just, we just imply that he slithered in there somehow.
Yeah. It went through the tub. So you know what I mean,
Oh,
like
the
the
drain.
water and everything went through the drain, I guess, and then went up to his tub. But like you said a little bit earlier, they were giving him animal brains, and so with the animal brains being much smaller than what Elmer starts to consume down the road as like more of a bigger dosage, Martha and the couple were keeping Elmer weak by giving him just like that small dosage of like feeding him smaller brains. So that's the definitely like you in the drug field in the world and everything like that, like some people can take smaller dosage or you go
Yeah.
overboard and you OD. So yeah, definitely.
So it's kind of representing that, like, need for more.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's what basically happens in this film.
Yeah. So as much as we need the drug also needs us, because
Yep.
it can't exist if we're not actively pursuing it, right?
Yeah.
So the drugs kind of seek us out in a way as well, not to, you know, say
Yeah.
that drugs have their own thoughts, but like, it moves along. It goes through communities and stuff like that.
Yep.
So we end up seeing Brian get his first encounter with Elmer.
Mhm.
Elmer says, "Just put me on your neck," in his classic Elmer voice. And Brian does that and sees like the most beautiful visions ever. We get this slow motion, like Elmer connecting to the neck, the tubes going in his neck, the blue dye going on his brain. And then all we see from there is these bright, like fluorescent colors flashing everywhere. And Brian is just like amazed by it, right?
Yep. And like you said a little bit earlier, with Elmer saying, "Just put me on your neck." That's how, a lot of users start out, because it's like peer pressure. You have someone talking to you and saying, "Hey, just try it. It's great." You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
just do it, So it's crazy because, like I said, like for me growing up, and in South Providence, drug usage and everything was always going around. So it was just like you would see those people kind of just going through those things, just doing anything just to get their next fix, you know what I mean? So it would become, to me, like, that's why for me, like, I think that like drug usage or anything was always like, I was wary about it, because I would always see the things that people would do to get this stuff into their system, and then it was
Yeah.
just like, no, I can't do that. And so even like with weed, with me growing up, man, I was just like, nah, I'm good, because I'm like, just any wrong way can go any way. And like I said, like, when you have family members or anything that are going through this stuff, it kind of just makes you think like, damn, nah, I can't do that, like how much a person has changed. And so like we're getting ready to talk about some changes that Brian started to go
Yeah.
through, so
Yeah.
you want to highlight some of those
Yeah.
things?
So like right before we see the changes, we see his experience when he's when he has Elmer's blue liquid or whatever that is. He has this whole tripped out experience. He goes into this uh giant like dump car graveyard type deal,
Yep.
and everything's amazing, but then this really bad thing happens. Like the security guard comes, and
Mhm.
Elmer ends up attaching to him, and that's a whole scene right there with the murder of him. But Brian's so high, he's just like, everything
Yeah.
still looks crazy, and he's just like, he just moves on. He like runs away from it and doesn't look back. And I think that like that, that can happen when you're in that state. You just kind of don't take it serious, and it's like that happened when I was high, and then you kind of just block it out and you move on from it. Uh,
Yep.
one of the things that we start to see, though, as the more he starts to use, like you said, we start to see the personality changes. And one of the scenes where I think this is like the most apparent is he's at the dinner table. He goes out to dinner with his girlfriend, and she's already starting to feel the distance from him.
Yep.
So, he's been he's acting different. He's not as connected to her. And he's just acting crazy there. He's acting like paranoid. He's seeing things in his plate. The paranoia, I think, was like big in that. Like he's like feels like everyone's going to notice, or they're going to see what he's seeing.
Yep.
And it just kind of like really highlighted that personality change that you'll see, and the changes in somebody's behavior. Because before that, our assumption is he was just this normal, calm demeanor like person, and
Yeah.
suddenly here he is. He's all frantic. He's like eccentric, and just acting like a totally different person.
Mhm.
And he ends up running away from the table, right?
Yep.
So,
And
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, yeah. So just to just go on those things, it's just how a person can change. Like you said, like we started to see how normal he was, and then just slowly becoming, you know, such a different person that like his family members and everybody's are not like realizing that there's issues and there's problems and that there's something going on, which falls into the line of next of pushing people away. And so you
Yeah,
want
no, totally. So like we see it first with his girlfriend, we see it with his brother. I mean, a lot of it's presumed
Mhm.
because we start the seeing, like, Brian's introduced to us like that first scene when he meets Elmer, but
Yep.
like there's an understanding of what he would probably was like before, because his girlfriend seemed to be so shocked and like distraught by his changes. His brother's like kind of trying to help her feel better because he feels bad, and he starts to get closer to her throughout that whole process. So as he's pushing people away, he's also pushing other people together, but not in like a way that benefits him at all.
Yeah.
So ultimately, Brian's only friend becomes Elmer at some point.
Yep.
And his whole purpose becomes getting his next fix and using and using and using and just kind of like going out, doing wild, risky things, and going out also to feed Elmer, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Kind of keeping his, keeping that side of the relationship. So, I mean, you can kind of make that mean whatever, but like as far as like doing what you need to do in order to get your next fix. So he's taken Elmer into, what would you call those things? Those public baths? Is that what they are? That they
Yeah. Yep.
Back in New York City, I guess they would have like a public shower that you could use or something. There's that scene. He takes him there. He goes to a nightclub, but it's all to get his next fix, because if he keeps Elmer happy, Elmer will keep him happy.
Yeah. And so just to touch on like, some of those things like in real life, just like you said, pushing people away or, having people around, like I said, going through it, my growing up, my cousin, his father was addicted, to the drugs, like crack and everything like that. And so how you push people away, and I would see things whenever he came around, it would be, everybody always had to watch him because he was always quick to like try to take stuff or things to get his fix. And so it was just like how his relationship with my cousin like affected him. Like my cousin started to look at him kind of like how Barbara and everyone kind of looks at him, like they try to help, but then at the same time, like there's so much pushing away, you start to cause issues with people. And so my cousin just lost all interest in his father, and things like that, and so just, and like I said, like just growing up in my neighborhood, you would see these people just walking around, and you could see what they were going through. Sometimes they would just talk to themselves, and then like I'm like sitting on my porch or whatever, these people just walk by me, and then they just get that, like, I see them get their fix in front of me. And I've seen so many people get high, like just like in little alleys in my neighborhood, and then like you just see like where they go after they inject that into them. It's just like you see Brian, like when he sees the colors and stuff, it's like they just have to do anything to get their fix. And so like I said, like for me, just growing up and seeing that stuff firsthand, it was just like, nah.
Two things of what you just said kind of like just sparked to me. The first is like that ability to be able to do things that like baseline, most of us would be probably ashamed, embarrassed. Like you kind of lose your pride in a way if you think about it, because like you'll engage in things that you normally wouldn't. You wouldn't want people to see you that way. You wouldn't want somebody to watch you in a certain state. But like when you get to a certain point, none of that really matters. Like you're just so driven for that next fix, or to get that feeling. The other part of it is manipulation, right? And I think we show that really well with this, like represented through the murders that we see Elmer do. But like Brian will do anything. The empathy, the like the conscious is not there. Like he will set people up for murder in order to keep Elmer happy. So I think that like that really highlights that manipulation piece. The nightclub scene with the woman that goes outside and she's about to unzip his pants and engage in that, like he has like there's no stopping. He's not going to stop and forewarn her or like try to protect her. He totally lets her get her face eaten by Elmer, and he doesn't care. He literally doesn't care. So he's super manipulative at this point.
Yeah, it's hard because it's like, that's why I say, like when I see people, like when they would walk by me talking to themselves, it's just like if they were talking, like Elmer was talking to them, like, what I mean? Like that, how Elmer was talking to Brian, and that's how that addiction takes on things. And like you said, are just so gone, and then they're not really thinking about what they're doing, or care about what they put people through.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I've seen things where people would put their family in the line, what I mean, like sell all their families Christmas gifts or stuff
Yeah.
just to get what they need, or if someone got a new game, whatever, like those people would come. And that's how, like, a lot of things, you get things cheap, like say the pawn shops. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of things that you're buying at the pawn shops are something that's stolen from someone, just for someone to kind of get their fix, that, and then it's resold to you at like a higher price, but those people are probably taking it for like $10 just to sit there and just
Yeah.
get whatever they need.
They'll sell things that are worth so
Yeah,
much
so much.
even in just like in value to a person. Like,
Mhm.
it could be someone's family heirlooms,
Yeah.
and like they wouldn't think twice about taking that from a family member and selling it for a
Mhm.
few dollars.
Yeah.
I had this person that I was working with, and he was sober, but he was talking a lot about like his paranoia he was feeling that's kind of carried over from when he first started getting sober. And he was describing all these crazy things he would do when he was using.
Yeah.
And like he was talking about like he was picking up guys and like bringing them to hotels and making them think some kind of thing was going to happen, but then he would just he would steal their clothing and their wallets and then just leave like
Yeah.
really quick and just leave them stranded in like a hotel. And I was like, oh, so you're kind of feeling paranoid because like, do you think like guilt's taking over? He goes, I don't feel guilty about any of that. I'm
Yeah.
paranoid that one of these guys, this is going to catch up to me one day. And I was like, for him, like, and this was like one of like many, many stories he told me like this. I was like, he doesn't have empathy anymore. I feel like it was almost like removed from him during that experience of using, and he had been using for a long, long, long time.
Mhm.
And it just like, it really highlighted just how that can just kind of be gone from someone at some point, and how like you don't really even think twice about doing horrendous acts to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Brian kind of does a lot of bad things. I think the thing that saves Brian for the viewer in this film, the thing that makes us not hate Brian, is Brian does a great job of, and the actor obviously,
Mhm.
of portraying Brian as like this. He's almost like a space cadet, right?
Yeah.
He's almost like a puppet to Elmer. So we never actually like get mad at him or feel like he's
Mhm.
malicious. But I mean, if you step back and think about it in this realm, like he is actually manipulative. He is setting people up to get murdered. But
Yeah.
we do have sympathy for Brian because we're watching him kind of get taken over by Elmer.
Yep.
So we talked about him push. Oh, God, sorry.
Oh, no, no. Yeah, you can go. You can keep
I
going.
was gonna say, so we watch him push people away.
Mhm.
He's using and using and using, because the more he uses and the more he pushes people away, the more he starts to, like, those little moments in time
Mhm.
where he's not high. I think he starts to see what he's creating, and he's
Yeah.
seeing like his brother getting close to his girlfriend. He's realizing that like that relationship's probably done.
Mhm.
Um, and at one point he literally hears, he's locked himself in his room. He
Yep.
literally hears his brother and his girlfriend having sex next door to him.
Yep.
And what happens? Elmer shows up, and Brian uses again to avoid the feelings, and then has this like dark fantasy about like a weird
Yep.
threesome with his
You're right.
brother, and then whatever.
And that's the thing, with that scene, a lot of people can sit there and say, "Oh, how can Brian's girlfriend and brother do something like that?" I think that, like, some people don't realize, when someone's so invested in trying to help you, and you're pushing them away so much, that those two people that are really trying to help you become so much closer, and
Yeah.
their main goal is to try to, like, help you, and then they're becoming frustrated and angry and upset and going through all those feelings, and then it's like they're at the point where they don't know what they can do anymore, and
Hmm.
it's like, and then they just start to just become close like this, and
They
in the
move
film
on.
they become closer, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
because it's just like, okay, well, obviously he doesn't want to help, and things like that happen in life, you know what I mean? So it's like, and like, I'm sure Frank, I'm not sure if that's something that happened in Frank's life, but
Yep.
it was definitely like a key moment. You start to see certain things of people, just, in life. It can say, hey, it can be someone's friend and their wife, and that just, you have a friend that sneaks in and just like, you know what, he's no good, and like kind of gets in that person's head. But in this film, it's his brother, it's a little different, but
Yeah, yeah.
those, those things they happen, you know what I mean? Because it's just about like how much someone's driven to kind of help you, and you push them away, and they take on all the feelings, you know, of their mental health is affected, and then take
Yeah.
on a bunch of issues, you know.
And I
So
think that's important to point out. Like his girlfriend is trying so hard, and like she's trying to help him, but also she's feeling abandoned the whole time.
yep.
He's cutting off all ties with her.
Hmm.
He goes in when they're doing their thing and basically blames. He starts to blame them and pushes them away even more. His brother has a great line though at this point. He goes, "You can't just disappear and expect nothing to happen." And I think that's really important. So like, you can't blame other people when you're running away from them and you're pushing them away constantly. If you're
Yep.
hiding out, then people are eventually going to move on. That's just life. You know, people want to
Hmm.
help you and want to support you, but like at some point they're going to have to support themselves as well. So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what happens with both the brother and the girlfriend is like, you know, they tried their best. They ended up bonding because, you know, they're trying to be there for each other.
Hmm.
And Brian gets more upset and just continues to use and use and use.
And you know, and to highlight on something like that, you know, it was like the situation with my aunt and my cousin, and how with the father, you know, they both would try and try and try to help the father, and then no matter what, he kept letting them down. Where they kind of just like the same situation with Brian and Brian's girlfriend and his brother, you know, they kind of like just turned their back, and was just like to a point where it was like they just had to focus on them, because no matter what they did to try to help him, it wouldn't change. Everything just kept on getting worse. He kept letting them down even more, and you know, and it just they resented everything about him. And so like when we like I said, when we would come around, it would just be like really weird and shit. So it's like my cousin just grew up really not caring, and then like even the whole uh like down the road, like my cousin and his mom, their relationship would go back and forth, because it would just be like it would be like crazy, because everything the father did, it would somehow
Yeah.
get back between them two, and then kind of have to
And
go through
and
that.
that's a huge thing. Like that family member doesn't just go away. A lot of times they end up interrupting future relationships for
Yeah,
other family members. So it's like it really does. And you know, some addiction can also sometimes be in genes. So people have to be careful. And
yeah,
sometimes, you know, what you model ends up being what the next generation ends up seeing and at some point doing. Some kids of addicts are like stone cold, like, no, I would never touch the stuff. They stay completely sober, and that's great. Some don't have that ability, or they don't have the same view, and you know that can be a challenge for them as well.
hmm
I think with Brian, so we see like, you know, now he's struggling with the relationship that's been bonding with his brother and his girlfriend. He's struggling
hmm
with the killing. He's struggling with just the fact that he's turned into a complete mess. So he just keeps using to avoid.
yep,
And you know, if there's one thing that like I always talk to people about as far as like a thing that is not helpful, it's avoidance. And you know, I'm the king of avoidance myself, so I'm not one to talk, but like
no,
using alcohol, using drugs as a way to avoid your problems does not ever help the situation. Your problems never go away. They just build and build and build. And at some point, you're going to have to face them. And it, you know,
yeah,
whether it's you get sober and you tackle them, or you hit rock bottom and then they're all just waiting for you. They never go away. And a lot of times they just follow us, they loom over us.
yep,
Which I think is like that stress and pressure you start to see with Brian as he starts to decompensate.
yeah. Now let's talk about that whole scene. You know, the hotel scene when Brian started to realize that like this needs to stop. You know what I mean? You know, like something needs to happen. Like I'm finished with this. Let's talk about
Yeah.
that whole thing of drug usage when people try to quit.
Yeah. So, I mean, that it's such a difficult thing for people. So,
Mhm,
you know, they kind of come to that realization that something needs to end. I mean, at one point, so I mean, in right before this, he ends up
mhm,
killing his girlfriend. So, I mean, and that to me is like, you know, using death of her as like a metaphor for like the death of the relationship. So he's actually pushed her away to the point where there's no coming back from it. That's on the subway scene. So, you know, he at that point, I think he reintroduced with Martha and Morris in this crazy scene, and you know they're starting to fight, and it's just like that's rock bottom. I think it's like there's nowhere else he can go, so he decides he's gonna have to end it, right? So at the end of the film, we see his head burst open.
But I'm talking about the scene. Remember when he had taken Elmer to, and they tried to stop, and then he had gone through, and he was pulling the blood out.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
So so we got to that. Like, I think we kind of skipped a little bit too further down.
Yeah.
But he got into that part where he was saying, like, you know, he went to the hotel. He tried to like quit. He was going back and forth with Elmer and putting all his problems on the table and starting to realize that, you know, this needs to stop. I'm affecting so many people, and I'm affecting myself. I'm not the same. And then you start to realize that, and it's like Elmer's just like, "Oh, you thought you were gonna get away from me, huh?" You know what I mean? And like, "Oh, Brian, oh, won't you just put me on your neck?" and stuff.
Yeah.
So he started to go through things, and then, you know, you start to hallucinate and start to see things because you're trying to break it, and you start to like just go through things that like it's so odd. And then so like just to see those things happen to Brian, like, you want to talk about that whole breakdown?
And I mean, yeah, I totally skipped that scene because that scene had the amazing visual of it's the blood gushing out of the side of his head, and that scene's like it kind of exhausting too, because like I feel like he intentionally lets that scene kind of go on a little too long. Like the visual with the blood lasts like way too long. Elmer kind of hanging out in the apartment and taunting it. The whole thing just lasts like a long time.
Yeah.
But it's like exhausting. And I think that's kind of representative of what that would be like for someone. And it's that back and forth conflict. You know, Elmer's almost like that voice in his head saying like, you know, just put me on your neck, Brian. Just let's go back. It's not as easy as just like going cold turkey or making the decision. He gets the realization at that point that I am, you know, my own worst enemy. I'm killing all these relationships, and yet he can't stop, right?
Yeah. And so, you know, like you said, that was, and so for a lot of the fans of film, like I think that's probably like one of the best effects, like part of in the film, you know. But that's just the things that life goes through, you know. And I'm pretty sure, like we talked about Frank, like trying to talk about his addiction, going through those phases of trying to get clean, you know, when people go and try to get help, you know, it's not easy, you know what I mean? So
it's the horror version of the scene in Train Spotting where he's trying to get sober. And like he's getting violently ill and stuff like that. I feel like it's kind of representative of that. For Brian, it's not an easy thing. It's not something that he can just kick because Elmer's strong. Elmer is persistent, and he will get what he wants.
Yeah. And then a big part of the film too, it's like, you know, Elmer has a song, you know what I mean? It's like Elmer's tune, and so it's just it just goes into that, and then just how it can take over you, you know, and kind of just how it greets you to that point to kind of like get Brian to just commit and just kind of give up. But
so remind me again, was this scene before the subway scene?
Yeah, so that was before it. So
as I alluded to before, so we get to the subway scene, and his girlfriend jumps on the subway with him, and she just starts kind of spewing like, "Oh, I'm so sorry you saw that," with her and her brother and the brother, and you know, just trying to express herself. You know, telling him how much she cares. He can't hear any of it. He's like super distracted by everything going on around him. Elmer's like part of him at this point. He's coming out of his mouth. He's, you know, Brian just can't feel anything outside of his own needs. So all he's thinking about that entire time is feeding Elmer, feeding the addiction, right? So as I mentioned before, he ends up killing his girlfriend in the subway scene, and that is the end of their relationship and her as a person.
And another thing to kind of like touch on while they're on the subway, I think another I think Frank kind of like he puts both of his films in that train, you know, when they're kind of like going on, when you see the, you know, the cast from Basket Case come on, and they're sitting right across them, and they're dealing with their own issues, and
Yeah.
they're sitting across from Brian and Elmer and everyone, and they're dealing with their own issues, and it's just that awkward scene where they just kind of like they look at each other, and then Dwayne gets up and just
Yeah.
kind of leaves to go deal with his issues, you know. So I think
Yeah.
that's, I think Frank kind of put that in there, because I'm not sure if like Basket Case Frank had anything that with that going on in his life, but I'm pretty sure there's like pieces or something that kind of like connect it into that point, to that scene.
I think
Kind of,
it's super representative of what it's like to live in a city, though. Here you are sitting on a subway
yeah,
with all this going on. You got the addiction, you're about to kill your girlfriend,
yeah,
and sitting across from you is someone who has even crazier shit going on in their lives, and you would never know, right?
yeah.
It like that's what it's like in a big city like that. Everybody's in there with their own problems, but it's that's how easy it is also to overlook somebody's problems too, right?
Mhm.
So like you all kind of just walk around and nobody's thinking like, oh, I wonder what's going on with this person. It's just like, oh, that dude looks weird and he's carrying a basket.
Yeah, and they both share the same thing of having that monster
Yes.
and kind of like taking them to kind of like kill, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
Kind of just, you know,
Yep.
so yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Like,
parallels with those two films, and I thought I love that uh little cameo though. I think that I
yeah.
think it's so cool that he did that.
Hmm.
So then flash forward, we get back to the apartment. As I mentioned, he's met by Martha and Morris.
Yep.
He's held at gunpoint. They want their Elmer back. Um, and I mean, I guess the only thing I really took out of this other is just like the risks of the lifestyle, right? It's like,
Mhm.
getting held at gunpoint. Brian, before he met Elmer, would never have ever imagined he'd be sitting, outside of his apartment being held at gunpoint by his neighbors or whatever.
Yeah.
It's the risks.
Yeah, and I think that that scene plays a bigger part because, like I've said, you know, for years I would see, you know, drug users and everybody like just in my neighborhood. And so it comes down to like that last scene was two users
Yeah.
ready to fight and put their
Yep.
lives on the line for that last hit. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Not, and like you said, like with your patient that would just take people and go and just do whatever and steal from them. This just came to that point where it gets more dangerous, where they're willing to put their life on the line for that drug. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And so that's what happened in that scene. I seen people, the like drug users fight each other, you know,
Yeah.
threaten to kill each other, you know, over a last hit or whatever, or doing stuff. So it's like the way that this film is like put together is well done, because like you said, like in that point in time in that city, I'm pretty sure that that was going on around everywhere. You know what I mean? Like, you know, shows like Snowfall. I'm not sure if you've seen that before.
No, I know what it is though. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
like the real life of Freeway Ricky Ross, you know, that's what happens. Your communities happen, you know, you
Mhm.
see people just change and willing to do whatever, like friendships are down the drain, they don't
Yeah.
care. Like they'll do whatever to get that last hit to kind of get what they need. And
Yep.
that's definitely this
It
film.
all it all comes back to you too. Like,
Yep.
nothing leaves, it all ends up coming back.
Hmm.
So then we get to the end of this film, the patient's head opens, a bright light of electricity bursts out,
Hmm.
and what we end up seeing here is this visual that kind of represents that the person's no longer there.
Hmm.
um Brian's not there. He's a shell of who he once was, and now he has become the drug response, the drug version of himself, right?
Yeah.
He's not Brian anymore.
Yep. And that's what happens is at that point in time when Brian started to realize that like that he lost everything at that point in that hotel, that's when he tried to kill himself. And he just tried to, but you know, Elmer
Yep.
took over again, not letting him die. And then that's when that light, you
Yeah.
know, comes from his head. And so it's just like it's how the drugs just gonna control you and tell you what we're doing and what's gonna happen. Like you're not gonna die right now. Like, I'm not finished with this, you know what I mean? And so that's just what happens. And I think that Frank did a great job with putting all these pieces together. And like you said, like we said earlier, you know, when I said that, you know, a lot of people that do reviews say, no, I see it this way, I see it that way. And Frank's like, no, this is what it is. You know, it's great that you can create art that gives people so many lanes to kind of interpret like how it's going to go, you know. So I think, you know, like I said, again, Frank did a great job with this, and this is definitely one of my favorite films that he has made, you know.
Yeah. And I just love when a movie helps provide visual for struggles or certain topics and themes. And I just feel like this really does fit into the whole substance abuse and addiction theme so well. And it gives such a great visual of the dangers that can happen from it, but also like how you just lose yourself. And that's, like I said, at the end, it's just not Brian anymore. And you see that. I mean, I'm sure almost everyone has had some experience with a person who has an addiction, and you've seen them just no longer be the person you knew they were before that. And you know, just for people's reference, one of them, if you're curious, like what classifies someone as being an addict, I guess, or having like a substance abuse disorder. You know, obviously there's the amount of use is considered, you know, the frequency, the drive, sort of like that distress that it can cause when you in the risks you're willing to take to get it. But one of the biggest things is that it has to really impact your day-to-day functioning in the domains of your life, work, personal, and relationships. So I mean, it really is, if it has that, that's one of the biggest factors. If something really does impact all those domains of your life, then it's probably more than just a casual use of a substance. So if you know someone, or if you yourself is, you know, kind of falls into that, that's definitely a mark that maybe you should kind of take a look at it and maybe get some help.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I was gonna sit there and say too, you know, like, don't feel like it's too late, you know, to get help, you know, reach out, because things can get worse, you know, because, you know, like I said, like before, me and Dave work in this field, and you know, with me working with children, sometimes I work with children that are born addicted to drugs, and you know, just their lives, you know, like how much they have to work through, and the behaviors and everything that happen, and then like just the damage that is carried over to them. It's just not that, it's not just one person, it can carry on, you know.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
so it's definitely get
Yeah,
help.
it does. It affects everybody around that person. So it really, when you do get help, and when you do take a look at your own use and stuff like that, it's more than just about yourself. It's actually about everybody that you love. So it is important. So yeah. All right. Well, I think that kind of sums it up. Brandon, thanks for diving into this one with me.
No problem.
So we appreciate you guys listening. We'll be back at some point again with another Horror Psych episode. These are fun, but also sort of, as I said, anxiety producing, and a little bit of work just to kind of make sure we hit all the marks that we hope to hit. We'd love to hear some feedback. So if you guys have any, just hit us up and let us know what you think. And
or if you're going through anything and you need to talk to one of us, just know that, like, you know what I mean? Like, we're always there. Like, message us, DM us, email us. If you're going through things, like, we're willing to kind of listen to you, because, you know, I know sometimes some people kind of look at us as someone that they can talk to and stuff like that. So it's just like, hey, we're here to help, you know. So
yeah, and we've all been there. We've all had we've had our rough patches too. So we definitely understand what it's like. So but thanks everybody, and we will see you later. Have a good night.
Take it easy.